everybody. So I'm Joe Kaufman. I am the 2016 Republican nominee against Debbie Wasserman Schultz for District 23, which is where we are right now. In fact, the district that basically runs from Weston in the west, all the way to Hollywood Aventura, down to the end of Surfside in Miami-Dade. Personally, in my private life, I do counterterrorism research, writing, and lectures. I do that for 3 think tanks: the David Horowitz Freedom Center, the Middle East Forum, and the Center for Security Policy. That's my background. God willing, if I serve very soon in Congress, which I believe will happen very soon, then I would be the only individual, I'd be the only member in Congress to have that type of background. And I think that's very important. I want to discuss with you a few issues, or some issues that I believe affect you, but also affect all of us. I know, once upon a time I was a college student myself, and I understand a little bit about student debt and student loans. And I know that concerns a lot of college students. It concerns college students all across America. And I know every time a politician brings that up, it gets a big reaction, usually, So, and I know that remedies that have been thrown at it sometimes are unrealistic. Talking about things like free tuition in colleges, which is a great thing if the economy could handle it. I don't think we can handle that today. I'm not sure that we can handle that, anytime in the near future. Also, talking about getting rid of debt altogether. That's something that's unrealistic. It's probably not going to happen. In fact, in Congress, I seriously doubt that many congressmen would ever support anything like that. Today we have we're reaching a $20 trillion debt, and that's very serious. So not only do we talk about student debt, but we're also talking about national debt, our country's debt. And it's something very big that we have to overcome. So I would say to you that the only way, the true way to get rid of debt, to get rid of any type of debt, to bring up the economy, is to bring up the economy through jobs. The situation today is that we have the largest gap between the rich and the poor since the 1920s. Now, the economy is kind of stagnant in the United States. Recently they came out with a good report or two from the economy, but basically that's a good report from today as opposed to maybe 7 years ago or 7.5 years ago when President Obama first started his first term in office. Basically today, the economy is not great. Jobs are not great. We want to assure students that when they get out of college, that they get a good job, that they get a good paying job. Today, a lot of the jobs, they're low paying, low wage jobs, and then a lot of other jobs are temporary jobs. So even though unemployment numbers are not very high in the United States, the truth is that a lot of the jobs, as I mentioned, they're low wage and they're temporary. And that's not what we want to see in the United States. We want to see people in the United States get great jobs where they get great money, great pay for what they do in the U.S. We don't want to see people coming home. We definitely don't want to see, kids living at home with their parents past college. But it's a reality today, and it's a reality that many kids, many young people face, unfortunately. But it has to do with the stagnant economy. It has to do with the job situation. A number of the corporations, huge corporations that were built here in the United States, corporations like Apple, Cisco, Microsoft, and Pfizer, companies that we see their names almost on a daily basis. They came to the White House years ago to meet with President Obama. And the thing that they asked from President Obama was very simple. They asked President Obama to get behind cutting the corporate tax rate in the United States. The corporate tax rate at the time was the highest in the industrialized world. Today, the corporate tax rate in the United States is the highest in the industrialized world. We're reaching close to 39% of a corporate tax rate today. So what happens as a result of that? Why do these companies go to President Obama and ask to get behind the corporate tax rate? And the reason is simple. Because they said at the time, and I believe it's true, although you never take anybody's word for it. Certainly don't take politicians' word for it when they make promises to you. And I'm a politician. But what did they promise in return for getting behind lowering the corporate tax rate? And not just lowering it, but lowering it significantly. They said that they would repatriate at least $1 trillion back to the United States. Now, $1 trillion is a lot of money for the U.S. And that doesn't just mean money. That also means building, bringing back the companies to the U.S. A lot of these companies move their operations overseas. So that would bring the companies, start operations inside the United States again, start creating jobs in the United States, maybe decent paying jobs. Because when I mentioned that there's low paying jobs in the U.S. that you can get, possibly after you graduate college, but a lot of those high paying jobs that college students used to get in the U.S. not so long ago, a lot of those jobs moved overseas. Thousands and thousands of jobs have moved overseas. Really, since the 1960s, millions of jobs from the U.S. have moved overseas. But in recent times, thousands of jobs. All these corporations that do not like, and maybe even more than that, are to a certain extent forced overseas. They say the same two things that the small companies, that the small mom and pop stores that are around the corner from here, if you go into the shopping centers, as I have, and you speak to the shop owners, and you've seen this before, when you go to those shopping centers and you see that half of the stores have for rent signs on their windows, that's a major problem. That's a major problem. And when you speak to the shop owners that are next door to those signs, who may have been there for a number of years, they will tell you that they're afraid that they're going to wind up shutting down because it's a domino effect. And what are their two gripes? It's the same two gripes as those corporations that moved overseas, that they're being taxed too much and they're being regulated too much. Now, of course, we don't want to get rid of all regulations. If you get rid of all regulations, you'll have chaos. You never want to leave everybody to do whatever they want at any time. The United States have to be regulating businesses. However, with the amount of regulations that have taken place in the U.S. over and over and over again, and the amount of taxes that we ask of these businesses over and over and over again, it's forced businesses to move their operations somewhere else. It's forced small businesses to shut down locally, and it's forced large corporations to move overseas. Now, I don't want to give any excuses to those corporations. They're making a lot of money. In fact, when I mentioned that today, this largest gap between the rich and the poor since the 1920s, it's true. But you know what? If you're worried that the rich are making too much money, this is exactly the system that we need to give the rich too much money, to overtax them and overregulate them, because it's true that tax revenue is revenue. When you collect taxes, that's money. Except that when those taxes are being collected in other countries overseas, then that's not money for the United States. So if people want to push for more taxes and more taxes, a lot of times that's not going to equal money for the U.S., that's going to equal money for someone else. And that's going to do harm to our country, because we want to bring up what? We want to bring up America first. We never want to stop. I never want to stop searching for, help for those who are oppressed overseas. I'll give you an example. Like in Iran, 2009, people took to the streets. They took to the streets to call for revolution against the mullahs of Iran and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, leaders of Iran. Many of them were waving American flags in the streets. They're calling for President Obama to do something, just say something, maybe not supply them with arms, maybe not get involved, but just say something. And President Obama did say something. He said he didn't want to say anything. He said he wanted to instead negotiate with Iran. And a lot of people perished. Hundreds of people died. I think 400 people were shot and killed, in those protests. And in the end, nothing happened. In fact, we saw one right on YouTube. It was mentioned about social media. In Iran, they shut down all social media, but there was a YouTube video that came out in front of our eyes. And you can probably see that on YouTube today, of this Iranian woman. She was dying on the ground. She was bleeding to death. She was shot right in front of our eyes and bleeding to death on the ground, calling for the U.S. to do something. The United States did nothing. In Venezuela, our Venezuelan friends who took to the streets to protest against Nicolas Maduro because of the oppression that's going on over there. And what did Maduro do? He ordered his National Guard to shoot at the young people protesting in the streets. People died as a result of it. People were in prison. People were tortured as a result of it. President Obama did the same thing. He said he didn't want to say anything towards those who were protesting. He wanted to negotiate with the Maduro regime. Now, I don't want anybody to ever take for granted young people. It's very difficult. I know I was born here in the United States, and I know growing up here, many times we take it for granted about the freedoms that we have, but people overseas, when they're suffering from oppressive regimes, we always have to remember how great we have it over here. One point. So to go back to the original thought. So to bring back the economy in the United States is to bring back jobs, to lower the corporate tax rate, which is what these major corporations were asking for, not to do everything that they want, but we want to bring back those American companies to the U.S., to lessen regulations and lessen taxes, to save those small businesses from being shut down, and for bringing back those jobs from overseas. Another issue along the same lines is the issue in trade. So there's been a big talk about this TPP, this Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Many of you have heard it. It's become a big, flashpoint with regards to this election. A lot of these trade agreements that took place in the past, the way that they were negotiated, they allowed for loopholes in these trade agreements, where countries were able to manipulate their wages at the detriment of the American businesses that were able to have free trade with those countries. And it also resulted in a lot of companies moving their operations overseas. It allowed for, if you have low wages overseas, and you're being forced from your government with high taxes and high regulations, and then on top of that, you have a manipulation of wages. You have bad partnership deals with regards to taxation, where your goods are not going to be taxed as much coming into the United States as they are leaving the United States. That's been the case in the past, and I believe, and many believe, that that's the case with regards to TPP. It's one of the reasons why I'm against it. The biggest reason why I'm against TPP, and there's a lot of reasons. There's a problem with it skirting our environmental laws. There's a problem, as I mentioned, with the manipulation of wages and all that. But the biggest problem is the fact that it was a secretive deal. A lot of it went on that was secret to the rest of the world. And if we're going to have something so big as this deal, we want everything to be out in the open. We want transparency. I look at President Obama's deals in general. I see like the Iran deal, where Iran was basically given $150 billion, and America got nothing in return for that deal. I look at the Cuban deal, where America got back an American citizen, Alan Gross. God bless him and his family. But you know what? In return, aside from Mr. Gross, America got nothing in that deal. In fact, in Cuba today, there's more violence and more imprisonments than took place before that deal. So I look at the deals that this administration is passing, and I say, you're not making such great deals. Maybe a trade deal with this administration could be much worse than we figure. So I would be totally against that. How much time do I have? How much time do I have? Great. Do I have any more time? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. So, well, I want to mention one thing that's a big deal for me personally, and it's worked its way into my campaign, but it's a personal issue with me, and that's the issue of medical marijuana. Now it's a personal issue with me, and you won't see many Republicans say that they're in favor of medical marijuana. You know, I think I was the only Republican in the area to be in favor of it in 2014. But the issue for me is intensely personal. My mother has multiple sclerosis. She's had it for many years. She's in pain every day of her life. She unfortunately, she gets prescribed pain medication from her doctors, and they're very hard drugs. I mean, you may have seen these drugs, Oxy. You know, you've all heard of this drug, highly addictive drug. Does a lot of damage to your body. She takes this in very large doses. You know, she tells me that she can't take this for more than 2 days straight without her feeling horrific effects from this. But she needs it for her pain. And her doctors say she can take it every day. You know, no problem. But I also understand something from Oxy. I know that when my little cousin, who was a star hockey player, whose scouts came to see him, who was engaged to be married, and one day he broke his arm. And the doctor prescribed oxycodone for his pain. He got hooked on Oxy to such an extent that nothing else mattered to him except the drug. And he unfortunately, when he was the age of 20, he died of a drug overdose as a result of the same drug that my mother takes to alleviate her pain for multiple sclerosis. And so for me, the medical marijuana is very important. It's important because many studies have shown that it alleviates many of the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. But it's also important for me because I know that there are drugs that people are taking today that are prescribed to them, perfectly legal, everyday legal, mainstream drugs that are killing people today in horrific numbers. And so it's an important issue for me to get behind, and I'm getting behind it 100%. And anyway, we're going to go to questions.